If you don't complain within 12 months, please, cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out.
So I want all the girls watching here and now to know that a new day is on the horizon.
All right. Guys, welcome to day 2 of the hashtag Unfiltered Summit 2020, Understanding Sexual Harassment, right? Yesterday, we had a very fruitful and educational conversation about like the Sexual Harassment Bill, what's wrong with it, what kind of recommendations we wanted. We spoke about our submission to, the Joint Select Committee, Girls Who Know submission. And we spoke about the different laws that protect the Jamaican citizens, regardless if you're male or female, surrounding like sexual offenses. And we took some comments, and it was just really nice, and it was very fruitful. If you're watching us on YouTube, then the replay is available on our YouTube channel. It's literally the video before this one. And if you're on Facebook, then you need to just hop on over to our YouTube channel so that you can, review the broadcast if you did not see it. So today is all about, understanding gender inequality. So we're going to be talking about a couple of things. We have a very jam-packed schedule, so stick with us, and we promise that you will not be disappointed. So we're talking about understanding gender inequality. We're talking about the Jamaican cultural context as it relates to, sexual harassment and how it is in our society, and what things really contribute to it or allow it to continue. We're going to be talking about raising men and boys to respect women through, comprehensive sexuality education. So we're going to be tackling how do we really raise boys that respect women, so that when they grow up, they're not going to contribute to the patriarchy, but kind of like dismantle it. Then we're going to be talking about other effects of gender inequality in Jamaica and how we see that play out. So we're going to be talking about women in politics, and we're going to have some lovely youth parliamentarians and persons who are youth, who are in politics or aspiring politicians, to kind of talk about their experiences. And then we're going to talk about the economic impacts, or how gender inequality kind of impacts women economically. Because if you didn't know, yes, it does. Gender inequality impacts every sector of your being, every sector of the country, every sector, everywhere, anywhere. So I'm just going to bring on our lovely or esteemed moderator, Shantae Shan, who is a YouTuber, a lover of Christ and his blessings. She has a YouTube channel called Shantae Shan. You need to go and subscribe. She's studying engineering economics and engineering studies and economics at Lafayette College on a full scholarships in the States. She is very enthusiastic, very vibrant. And without further ado, let's bring on our host, Miss Shantae Shan.
Hello, everybody. Wagwan. OMG. Yesterday was so informative. Like, it was truly eye-opening, surprising. And it's good that, Girls Who Know is taking up the mantle and just kind of running with it and educating young people and older people too, because I sent the link to a few family members and they're like, what? It's crazy. So yesterday was really good, and we're going to try our very best to outdo yesterday, get better as each day comes. And today we're understanding gender inequality. We have a very robust panel and lots of different panels too. The first panel consists of Carla Moore, Antoinette Hines, and Professor Opal Adisa Palmer. So you want to talk a little bit, Chelsea, first about why this is important, and then we could just jump right into it afterwards.
I'm actually going to bring on our co-director, Antoinette Hines, to come and hop in right now. So, girl, yesterday was the bomb.com. And I don't know, the summary was like in itself half an hour because we just had so much to talk about.
Yes, definitely. I mean, yesterday was so enlightening and insightful, even for myself. A lot of the things I didn't know. And, it really just kind of shifted my perspective and definitely made me, really think that, yeah, we have to do this, we have to run with it, and it's absolutely imperative and necessary for our society and for our people. And, day 2 should be just a stepping stone from that. And, I'm very excited to dive into gender inequalities and, looking at everything from that sociocultural, political, and economic perspective so that people understand the different, factors that affect gender inequality and what, perpetuates it in our society. So
I'm excited. And one of my, I think this is my favorite because I feel like people will finally understand how far spread or how much gender inequality really affects every single thing in your life, like every single thing. Just for example, women get paid less than men. And if a mother is the breadwinner of her family, then so I'm just really excited, and I'm pumped. I hope you guys are pumped, and I'm just gonna invite Shantae back on to introduce our panelists.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. So let's get right into it. The first person I'm going to introduce today, her name is Carla Moore. She's an artist, an academic, activist, and alchemist. She has lectured at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Mona unit, since 2014, with a focus on the Western Jamaica campus in Mobe, Montego Bay, right? She is a content creator through her More Talk social media brand, where she has undertaken cultural criticism, social intervention, entertainment, and healing work over a decade. As a gender specialist and activist, Carla focuses on addressing social issues through holistic healing at the individual level. She's especially passionate about creating safe and healthy families and unsettling damaging stereotypes and patterns that have developed as a result of colonialism and persistent poverty. Her most recent project is her Upful Livecast, an Instagram conversation series recording live on Sundays at 11 a.m. Jamaica time. So you should definitely check that out. It is a space for us to reveal and to heal. Reveal things such as race, gender, sexuality, beauty, desire, and class in aspects of Caribbean and Jamaican life. She holds a bachelor's in media and communication with honors from Carimac at UWI and a master's in gender studies from Queen University in Kingston, Ontario. So, right. And next up, we have Antoinette Hines. She is a multi-passionate powerhouse. Antoinette is recognized as a creative and revolutionary youth leader who promotes the education of women to have autonomy over their sexual and reproductive health to truly reach their peak state of empowerment. With a budding background in marketing and communication, she bridges the gap between philanthropy, social good, and traditional marketing and branding techniques. As a student, she has over 1.5 years of industry experience in production and marketing and over 2 years of nonprofit management experience. As she graduates, it is her dream to merge two of her passions to continue building the future of Jamaica. And finally, we have Professor Opal Adisa Palmer, diverse and multi-genred. Opal Palmer Adisa is, my apologies, yeah, Opal Palmer is an exceptional talent nurtured on cane sap and the oceanic breeze of Jamaica, real island girl, right? Currently, the director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at UWI. Adisa has lectured and read her work throughout the United States, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Germany, England, and Prague, and has performed in Italy and Bosnia. An award-winning poet and prose writer, Adisa has over 16 titles to her credit. For the last 23 years, Opal was a distinguished professor at California College of the Arts. She has been a visiting professor at several universities, including Stanford University, University of California, Berkeley, and the University of the Virgin Islands. Her poetry, stories, essays, and articles on a wide range of subjects have been collected in over 400 journals, anthologies, and other publications, including Essence magazine. She's also conducted workshops in elementary through high schools, museum, churches, and community centers, as well as prisons and juvenile centers. So without anything more, let's get our panelists on and let's get the discussion started. I hope I didn't butcher anybody's name or anything. If I did, feel free to correct me.
No, you didn't.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Oh my goodness, I'm already so excited. I'm pumped from yesterday. But yeah, let's get right into it. I think I'm going to start off with the professor in the house. And my question to you is, and feel free to add on, ladies, if you have anything else that you'd like to say on this question. So the first one is, what do you believe are undertones that propagate the cultural, influence? So we as Jamaicans, we already know that we're very closely. We love close interactions. For example, we can be very tactile in hugging, and we love to touch. That's the kind of culture that we have in Jamaica. Very unlike like America. Like I'm here right now, and it's not like that. So we know what the culture is like in Jamaica, but firstly, do you think it is an appropriate representation of our culture? And if so, how does that play a role in how we perceive sexual harassment? I know that was kind of loaded, but let me know what your thoughts are.
No, that's a very good question. And I always say to people, let's not confuse tactility and the need to touch and hug as sexual harassment. They're very different. I love the touchy-feely culture because I talk with my hands, and when I'm talking to somebody, I want to touch. But there's a real distinction between sexual harassment, and I think a lot of times men in particular want to pretend as if they don't know what that is. So, for instance, just last week, a man was saying to me, "Boy, I won't even know how to teach my son how to date," and I was like, "Why is that?" Because he can't say a woman looks good. I said, yes, he could say a woman looks good, but he doesn't have to say, "I like your ass" or something like that. So we should not throw out the touchy-feeliness of it. We are setting their boundaries, and I think we know when we cross those boundaries. I think men know and boys know when they're being inappropriate, and don't use our culture to cover up your inappropriate behavior. So that for me is must be understood. I think many of us enjoy this intimacy of our culture. But we also understand that a lot of men, or some men, abuse it and then want to say, "Oh, because I don't know, I was..." No. You know when you cross the line. And if you don't know, women tell you, but you still cross the line. So let's just control yourself, and let's understand that you've been culturated to be inappropriate to women, and now you're being corrected. We're saying no more. We've had enough.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It's very true. And then sometimes you don't want to speak out sometimes because you feel as though you're speaking out against your own culture, and nobody wants to do that. But that, yes, we are an intimate and tactile culture, but it doesn't have to pass that limit for real. I love the distinction that you clearly made
So,
just
so
now.
for instance, what
Yes,
if
go
we,
ahead.
women, and I understand that now some women and girls are doing it. What if we were to go around and to say every time we see a man and we like it, whatever part of his body we like, if we were to
Yeah,
say, I mean, they would get tired of it. Oh, I like your chest. You have nice thighs, or whatever, or even try to touch them in the way that oftentimes boys feel it's their right to touch women in public. It would not go down so well. So we have to understand the patriarchal structure where men are in power, even men on the street who don't have a job and no teeth, still feel they
right.
have the right to call you out and talk about your body parts that you and them are intimate in a relationship. And so we need to say no. We are equal here. I'm not out there for you to point out my body parts. If you see me and you like me, you could say, "Hey, good morning. I like you." But don't be talking about my breasts or my ass or any of those other things.
Right, right. Okay, I have a question on that as well. And I just want to let you guys know, for the persons that are tuned in on Facebook and on YouTube, please feel free to shoot any questions that you have in the comment section. I'll be ready and happy to ask him for you. But on that matter, yesterday we were talking about, just the law and the bill. And there was a part in there that came up where a senator says we're addressing verbal harassment, which is very prevalent in Jamaica. And I can't help but understand where the senator was coming from when she says that she sees that as validation of how good she looks sometimes. But sometimes you really feel as though the words that they've just uttered to you have already stripped you naked and you don't even feel as good as before. So is complimenting, like, what advice would you give to, as you say, like, the taxi man, or
Father
wasn't
with his
he
son.
speaking,
Yes.
yes, father with a son. And feel free, Carla or Antoinette, to step in and tell me what your thoughts are on verbal harassment, because that is a part. I'm going to be bold and say it, a part of Jamaican culture where, or we've allowed it to become normal, where the men verbally harass you. If I feel verbally harassed, so how do we speak to that part of our culture?
Again,
So,
my point.
sorry, go
Again,
ahead, Prof.
sorry. Let me just quickly, and then I'll let you ladies jump in. Again, by pointing it out and to say to men, it's not that we don't like to be complimented. I see men, and if they have on a nice shirt, I say that's a nice shirt. I don't go under their shirt. I mean, I never, the
Yes.
pants are kind of regular, so I never say, that's a nice pants. But I wouldn't then go say something about your penis or something like that.
Right, right.
So it's the same thing. You could see me and says, "Oh, I love how you look." I would feel good. But then when you start going into the private parts, then that just blows it. So I let these young ladies talk.
Thanks. So it's a great question because it hits at a concern that a lot of people have. When the discussion of sexual harassment comes up and men brace against it, a lot of times what they feel is you're going to take our right to be men, right? And inside of that is this complicated thing, which your right as a man is your right to look woman, which also not every woman is interested in you. So please be very mindful of how you're using that as a framing. But for me, if I had to like pick a very shorthand way of dealing it, and I'm flagging this as shorthand, if you wouldn't be comfortable with somebody saying that to your mother, don't say it to somebody girl child. And it's that simple. If you would not be comfortable with somebody saying it to your mother, do not say it to somebody's girl child. Because, and I mean, even that is complicated because there is a way that Jamaican men desexualize their mothers so they can value them. Right. So it's very difficult for them to value a woman who is a potential sexual partner because woman as sexual partner is worthless, worthless, just because of the fact that you yourself can have sex with her. It's a very complicated gender thing that we do, right? And so that's why a lot of men, if you should point out to them that their mothers had sex in order to get them want to fight you. What kind of thing that? My mother would never do them nasty something there. And it's like, but you're here. You're actual proof that your mother had sex. But in order to hold her as, so it's like the Madonna whore thing, right? In order to hold her as separate, apart, special, different from this Eve, Delilah, cunning, sexual object. They have to desexualize her. And so I understand in that way it's a very complicated starting place, but I feel like it's a useful one. If you wouldn't want somebody to say that to your mother, don't say it to somebody else, because sometimes we start off with culture and we overlook the fact that culture is informed by other things. Things that would have been okay before are not okay now because of how things shifted. We used to be okay with children eating X amount of candy. Okay, but picnic stop run up and down outside. They are now sitting down with the iPad, so the amount of candy that they can eat has to go down to accommodate for the other things. So, I am all for being tactile. Yes, of course. And we can be people who are very expressive and we make contact with each other. There's a way that Caribbean people who move overseas, we can end up with a type of like touch hunger because nobody touches us. I went through it when I was in Canada. There's a way you just feel so alone because you used to somebody laugh, them lick up on your hand. When you get there, it's just like, you is an island and nobody ever touches you and it's just you by yourself, just you, and you're like, I don't want to be harassed, but I would like if somebody touched my skin, please, could you please, and give us something a little more something, right? But it's like things have to shift now, and especially as we look at the levels of trauma and the levels of abuse, and also the number of women who are walking down the road who are survivors and who are carrying that trauma. There's something that has to shift to accommodate that. We don't have to lose being tactile, but you have to be very conscious. And for me, that's it. Like, we want to use culture as an excuse to be asleep. That's not an excuse for you to be asleep. Culture is a thing that we are consciously shaping, and you have to show up as conscious inside of it.
I agree totally. And I mean, just to chime in a little bit and to echo on that note, recently I had a conversation with a gentleman, and his point was that, as a man in Jamaica, you have some women who love to be catcalled or love to be complimented, and, like, for example, wagwan tickers or wagwan baby, big breast. He was basically saying that, there are some women who like that and who want that attention. But, a part of it is that we have become so desensitized to certain things, and toxic behaviors have been normalized. We feel as though it is okay, and that, there's nothing wrong with wanting that. But, in truth and in fact, it's not okay, and it's really perpetuating, toxic behaviors that just need to not exist any further. Because as Professor and Carla have been saying, it's always the approach and always, maintaining that level of respect as well. So yes, you can comment and, tell a woman how good she looks, or tell a man how good he looks as well. But you don't want to cross that boundary and that, basic level of respect that should exist between any two people or people who are interacting with each other. So,
I got that. I understand that, Anthony. And I have a question for you. As a young lady in Jamaica, what would you say people often miss from the discussion about sexual harassment? What is something that we don't really highlight as good as we should? And what are young people experiencing in their daily lives? You're living it in school, in taxis, while shopping. What is that like for you? Please give us some insight.
me, it's very rough because, I'm attractive and my body is
That's right.
sexy. And so, every day it's a daily struggle for me personally to go on the road, travel, go to wherever it is that I'm going peacefully. It can't happen. There's always a man commenting on my body, what he would like to do with my body. And it's very frustrating because a lot of the time I just want to go from point A to B, get what I'm getting done without having to deal with all of that. And then, there are times too when I feel so endangered and just so fearful because if you don't respond to some men, they start to pace you down and to start to get very aggressive and say, well, you can't take the compliments and whatever, and they start to, it's very frustrating and honestly rough. And I think one thing that we often miss too in that discussion around sexual harassment is the fact that women also sexually harass men. A lot of the times we hear that, yes, women are the ones who are more sexually harassed, and the discussion is largely around that. but we kind of, not really tackle it as much as how the men experience it. And the fact that women too perpetuate, these toxic gender specific behaviors and perpetuate misogyny, and, I think that's something we ought to, tackle as well, because while we are empowering women and pointing out the issues that women face in our society, it's not equivalent to bashing men or tearing down men. So I think there ought to be a balance that strikes between empowering women, pointing out what men do that's wrong, and the same for women. So we don't want there to be an imbalance between how we
Right.
address certain issues. Yeah, that's what I think.
I want to
I
just add, if I might, a few things that Antoinette just pointed out. One, which is very important. So some women will say, well, I like that. And that's the way you kind of internalize the abuse. And for those women who claim they like it, they think it's the only way that a man can show appreciation for them. And so that cannot be the measure about it's okay because some women say they like it, right? And I
right.
don't think men understand, or even boys, because during IDIVOR, the 16 weeks to end, 16 days of activism to end violence against women, we go to schools, and the girls always say what you say, Antoinette, that they're just tired of the constant harassment, especially those who are, attractive and have the body that Jamaican men like, behind and breasts, right? Um, and I think also because women are empowered, some women are empowered now, they figure, well, if men do it, I can do it, which is not what we want because the behavior is wrong. So those women who are doing it, I certainly don't condone that. We both need to understand that the body is your temple and it's to be respected. I'm a what they call in Jamaica big woman, right? I could have grandchildren.
Right.
And I am coming from an exercise class just a couple of days ago, and some man is trying to talk to me and I say, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I am walking. I'm a grown woman with
It's
grown
too early for that, sir.
who is bothering me. Why do you think at 6 o'clock in the morning I would want to talk to you and I don't know you? I mean, it's
If
absurd.
It is.
Really.
And I don't
Carla, why you?
understand how you feel. Let me tell you, when I was 13 and going to Woolworths, I hated my body because I had breasts and behind, and it was constant, like what Antoinette says, constant. And I hated walking alone. I absolutely hated it. And when I speak to some girls at these high schools we go to, it's the same thing they tell me. It has to change, and it has to change. It
yeah,
has to change.
yeah. If I could add one thing, I would love
Yeah.
to add the fact that people don't understand how early we start getting harassed, and I think we need to flag up the fact that of this older men harassing young women, and I don't even know if we can call this harassment anymore, but young girls. I come from a small country community. Is only one school in my community where my uniform, you know that it's a prep school, which means the oldest person there is 10 or 11. I am walking up the street from school in my uniform, and some big old greyback man put argument to me, harassing me. And I'm like, but I'm a child. I am wearing the international uniform of childom, which is a prep school uniform, sir. What more could you want? And so one of the things that I feel when a 18, 19, 20, 25-year-old woman is kind of expressing this level of frustration, men are like, but why you going so far, sir? This started when I was 8. So please understand, you're catching me at 19. I'm 11 years in. I've been exhausted since before my bust breast. I was exhausted before my bust breast. And the moment those 2 little mosquito bites came out, it became exponentially worse because now everybody wants to talk to me about the mosquito bite. And so it's also, there's a way that men, oh no, I would never have sex with a child. Yes, but how many children have you made inappropriate comments about their body as they are walking home from primary or prep school? It starts early and we are exhausted from early. And then psychologically, some men don't understand why women feel so unsafe around them, right? There's a good amount of us, we don't feel safe around men. Why not treat us like the enemy? Why we act like we're animals? Well, the men who were supposed to protect me because they were the elders in the community were coming at me. I had to start protecting myself from them from I was a child. So actually, I don't feel like I have any safe spaces, because if childhood is not safe, then nowhere else will be. So we are deeply uncomfortable with you, because regardless of our age or your age, you're engaging in the same behaviors and you're training your sons into it. I don't feel like people recognize that. And I mean, it's a horrible way to have to frame it, but men, you are making it very hard for yourselves to keep dating, because we're scared of you. We don't want to date you anymore. You're terrifying. You are making this awful for yourself. You should stop your brethren. Your brethren is harassing you out of dates, my bro. They're harassing you out of dates.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I'm so glad you made that comment. And I want to make the correlation, about how young it starts, because the average age, I did a survey, is 9.
It's 9, right?
The age of sexual harassment is 9. And I believe that there is in fact a correlation between sexual harassment and sexual abuse. If you look at the data of sexual abuse, a lot of the girls who are being sexually abused are between 9 to 15 by the very men. And oftentimes it's not a stranger, it's by the very men in your community. Very men in your community. Those older men. It's almost like, I used to think they could smell you when you were on your menses, and they knew you were becoming a woman now. And if you started early, they smell you, and they were vicious. They were predators. They are predators. And they need to understand that. And they need to understand the relationship between sexual harassment and sexual abuse, which is outrageously high in Jamaica.
Wow. Agreed. I mean, it's a little bit, it's very scary. It's very scary, because just this morning I was discussing with my sister, and she was telling me a story of a young girl who attends her high school, that I'll not mention, but she attends her high school, and she was basically telling me that young girl would be harassed by policemen, teachers at the school. She would be, having sexual relations with those men as well. And it's just to echo what Carla said, we are so unsafe in all our spaces. Yes, you have men in our communities or in our homes who sexually harass us. But then policemen who are supposed to be upholding, the mandates of the Justice Office to enforce law and to protect Jamaica's people. And children are our babies. We should take a lot of pride and take our job seriously in protecting them and educating them, so that they don't, make the wrong decisions or come into situations or, just experiences that they could have avoided if they knew. And it's just so devastating to know that these men and people who have power in our society and have status and people who we look up to and idolize are the ones who are perpetuating these toxic behaviors and making everything just so much more worse than it
I
needs to
totally agree, Antoinette. And on the point that Carla made about us being afraid, I never realized I was afraid until you actually, like, I knew I would always have my guard up whenever I was like going places like halfway through or whatever, but I would always subconsciously almost have my guard up, and my face would instantly, like, I'm naturally very bubbly and smiley, but whenever I'd walk past a group of men, it's
serious thing.
and then I'd want them to back off when I'm like, but they would be like, you can't smile, you can't, and you can't avoid them. You honestly cannot. And it's like, especially when I'm by myself, I love being in a group, not only because of the protection, like physically, but also it just kind of wards them off a little bit. And some of them are brazen and will even try to come at you when you're walking with, a group of friends or something like that. But my next question for the panel, I know that this conversation just really, really spicy. It's crazy how we are connecting on this level that we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be experiencing the same thing from big woman, from you. It shouldn't be a thing. It should not be a thing. This is just appalling to me. But the next question is, how do we, as a society, as a Jamaican society, go about confronting our biases and implementing systematic change and shift the culture towards equality and understanding all of that? What can we do? We understand what our experiences are, and they're very, very similar. It's the same experience. Me, you, Antoinette, Professor, and Carla have. What can we do now?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we can do is what we're doing. We're beginning to educate and we're beginning to say this is unacceptable. There needs to be billboard signs throughout the island that says don't put out your tongue or any of those other insulting things that they do to women. Women are not out there for you to talk about their bodies, you know? So don't talk about our bodies.
Yes.
Doesn't mean you cannot greet us, you know? I also think, and this is some of the things I say to the men I know who are good and wholesome, you are responsible to talk to your other men friends to let them know that this is unacceptable. You have to let them know. So what I said to that man who says, well, I can't even talk to my son about dating, I said, yes, you can. And the first thing you tell him is that he should respect women. That's the first thing you tell him. He should respect women and he can compliment them, but don't go under their dresses.
Yes, agreed.
First of all, the sexual harassment bill the anti-sexual harassment bill needs to be modified and it needs to be promoted. There needs to be one of the ways, billboards all over that says sexual harassment is not acceptable. This is what constitutes sexual harassment for those men who try to pretend that it's not there. And then we have to have conversations on the radios, on the TV, in the newspaper about sexual harassment. That's one of the methods of nipping it in the bud.
Yeah.
Definitely, I agree. I think we need the equivalent of a Jamaica move for sexual harassment in Jamaica.
Yes, yes.
Big, impactful social marketing campaign that is in your face every day and that is easily digestible for all ages and stages, so nobody can escape from the message. That's what we need. And and we also need just a strong enforcement of community efforts. We need as a people to collectively keep each other accountable, speak out against certain things, and just like even little things that you can do. So say for example, you see a young woman being harassed, kind of just like subtly try to intercept what's happening and say, hey Ashley, what's up?
Yeah.
Even if you don't know who she is. Or hey, did you drop something to kind of just divert that action. But yeah, I definitely think we need a Jamaica move for sexual harassment and stronger community involvement.
I agree. I think all of those are amazing. And what I would add to that, which actually kind of extends what something that Antoinette said, is I feel like we need to stop using culture as an excuse for things, and to understand that culture is dynamic and is constantly evolving and we are shaping it. And also to link back to what Prof said, we need to hold a higher standard for men. No more of these boys will be boys. No more of this asomantan. Because we never say that when they're doing something great. It's always when they're doing something trash that we're like, oh, that's how they are. And I'm like, men, you not feel bad. So we don't expect anything of you, but they don't, because that expectation allows them to get away with murder. One of the big things I feel is we need to start liking women. As a culture, we do not like women, and it underwrites everything that we do. And so I suggest that every person should ask themselves at least once a day, why do I dislike women? Why do I dislike femininity? Why do I dislike females? Those are 3 separate questions that you need to ask yourself. And then you go, no, I don't. And then look into your behavior. And when you hear that a woman was assaulted or harassed or something bad was happened to her, ask yourself, if you say, good, she probably deserved it. Well, then you didn't like her for no reason. So let's get into that, right? Why do you dislike? So, and I feel like when we actually can come to that place where we unsettle that misogyny, women will stop accepting harassment as a way that men can engage them, or the only way that men can engage them. And men will, the way that them talk to women as though they're not humans and a call we it and those things, they will have to shift, because we no longer hate women. Hold a higher standard for men, and also release the stranglehold that we have on masculinity. I feel like we are so terrified of changing masculinity because then men will cease to exist and we'll be only women in the world. But not only women and mama man. Like, okay, so being gay is the worst thing a man can do, sit down, right? But we have this stranglehold on masculinity because we're so terrified that we'll stop producing heterosexual men if we don't keep culturing them in the exact same way. Release it. There is a lot we can change before what we know as man disappear. Also, there's no one way to be man. Please come to the IGDS. We have an entire course for you.
Whoa!
We got a course. Prof would have a course.
She has a course.
We got several courses.
Goodness.
That's right. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. It's really about reframing masculinity. And, the patriarchal doctrines are no longer applicable. We will not go forward with those at all. And the thing is, men need to understand it doesn't even serve them. That's the thing. It doesn't serve them. It really thwarts their development as human beings. We're talking about basic respect here, people. It's not rocket science. We're saying basic respect. Respect. Respect women.
And like women.
Respect them. You are not constantly talking about them as sexual objects because we're more than that.
Wow, I agree. I'm going to take a minute and go to the comments. We've been receiving quite a bit. And okay, so we have someone here saying, no, Dirty of Jamaica, Sexual Harassment Edition. Okay, and girls who know could lead that movement. I totally agree with you, Shakira. Douglas, hashtag free up masculinity, no more stranglehold on masculinity. And we have some people here who say people want to stop the victim blaming from Kimberly Trout. Everybody saying yes, Antoinette. We need a Jamaica Moves equivalent for real. I really love that comparison, Antoinette, that you made. We need that. We need a nationwide campaign. Affluent Curl saying that's right. And Lansdale Campbell saying it's very sad to know that this has been happening from slavery days, plantation owners taking advantage of Black women for us men in Jamaica to take it on as a culture, air quotes. Yeah. Very sad. I agree. Leonie Farquharson saying, wow, I felt all of this so hard. They need to be taught from young. Socialization of boys needs to partly be addressed from the side of the state. That's what Sabrina Brown says. And Sabrina also suggests gender studies from prep and primary school, teaching them from young. I agree. We have Kalitha saying police officers don't know enough of the law to be police officers. No lies were told there. Rick says, I have often said that one usually leads to another. Sexual harassment isn't just, it's crazy. Right now I'm in Florida and I heard, and when I say, I never walked so fast in my life, I just hear, I was walking down the street. Is somebody fixing a tire? Nobody.
Oh no, sis.
The sound is so ingrained, like in my subconscious. Anytime I hear it, is
ready. Guards up. Let's go.
Where and I said, let me look around because I'm not seeing anybody to me. And I wasn't in New York. You know, if you're in New York, you know, it's like Jamaica part 2. I'm in Florida. It's not like Miami or not like that. And I look around, I said, where him come from? Who him know a Jamaican? It's so a standout. When I look, not one soul is just a tire. So that just goes to show how I react to things like that and how stuck or how ingrained it is in my being from growing up in Jamaica. So
and that's on PTSD.
And that's how it stays with you. Here's another thing. In terms of helping to end it, women need to speak up. I don't think we speak enough to our brothers, our boyfriends, our husbands, whatever. Yes. Because I had a conversation with a man and he said, oh no, this never happened. When I went to his house and I spoke to his wife and his wife told him, he was shocked. She says, of course it happens to me all the time. He was shocked. He was saying it's not so prevalent in this area where we live. I said, yes, it is. I said, go home and talk to your wife. And his wife said to him, yes, even when I'm going to the market on Saturdays, it happens. But she never said that to him. And a lot of times we don't say to the brothers and the other men in our offices and other places and how it makes us feel. I think we need to do that. This doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel like I'm fine and flying high. No, no,
It
no.
doesn't. It's not a compliment. It's not. Wow. You know what doesn't make me feel good? Having to call an end to this wonderful segment. Oh my goodness. It doesn't make me feel good at all. We need
10
to have
out of
more
10 for that
conversation.
segue, sis. 10 out of 10 for the segue. Sis did it.
That's an important conversation, and I was glad to be a part of it.
It is 30 minutes could not do this justice. We need to have more spaces to talk about. I can't believe we can relate. This feel like I went to a therapy session. This is crazy. This
Because we are
How
therapy.
women heal each other by
Exactly.
talking about it and by sharing the story.
Right. Yes.
Yep.
I agree.
Wow. Well, we have another story to share, and I thank you guys so very much for coming on here and starting the conversation. This is not the end of it, girls who know. We are going to have more spaces like this so that we can talk and just be hashtag unfiltered.
We look forward to the campaign that you're going to lead about sexual harassment. And
That's right.
Right. No, that's in Jamaica.
We ready.
Oh wow! I'm going to invite Chelsea on here to just share her thoughts a bit as we go into our next segment. Thank you guys so much.
No, sir.
That was total fire. My God.
My heart, like I was in the background just doing this. Period too, like,
Oh my goodness.
and it's
That's
so we just like every woman, every Jamaican woman, girl who is watching this live, it's just sad to say that they can relate and like
It's
feel it
sad.
therefore. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, well, our next segment is all about raising boys who respect women through comprehensive sexuality education. And some of our people, they're from Girls Who Know and Gents of JA. The first panelist we have is Joel Namdarkam. Joel is recognized as a creative and eccentric youth leader who promotes the need for persons to live the best versions of themselves. With over 5 years in marketing and communication, he bridges the gap between corporate marketing and personal brand building. Kicking off his early days in marketing as an intern, he works as a regional digital marketing specialist. Joel specializes in social media marketing with a heavy focus on strategy, analytics, campaign development, and creative direction. The Muse spent over 2 years as a television presenter, putting his journalistic skills to use and adding a different face to broadcast in Jamaica. He's also an avid youth advocate, having spent much of his life in leadership roles or involved in voluntary projects, and has been recognized countless times for his work. Secondly, we have our very own Chelsea Wright from Girls Who Know JA. Chelsea Wright is a budding industrial engineer studying at Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. At 17, she became the founder and chief executive feminist at Girls Who Know Jamaica. She is a multi-passionate action taker who is fueled by her innate belief that she must be the change she wants to see in the world. Her efforts have been rewarded by her receipt of the Prime Minister's Youth Award for Nation Building in 2018 and recognition by a Woman Deliver in 2019. Lastly, but by no means least, we have Patrick Watson Jr., founder of Gentlemen's Association of Jamaica. Patrick Watson is a student of the University of West Indies Mona campus, pursuing a degree in psychology and management studies. He's passionate about family structures, male mentorship, and changing the minds of Jamaican men so that the negative stereotypes surrounding them can be removed. His passions led him to the start of Gentlemen's Association of Jamaica, a nonprofit organization focused on advocacy, male mentorship, and volunteering. It is the goal of this organization and Patrick to change the hearts and minds of Jamaican men so that the future of Jamaica can be even brighter. Let's welcome our panelists. Let's go. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Everybody.
How's it going?
Yes, I see Patrick come on with a mask. It's okay.
Yeah, man. I had to. You see, I'm at work, so and I had to
Okay.
take a break from work. But yes, and I had to promote because we finally got our new masks.
Okay.
Right.
Yes,
That's
yes,
good.
yes, yes.
So I'm gonna kick it off with a nice question, and it is: what has your role as a man taught you about how women should be treated in the Jamaican society? You can take a minute to digest that question. It's kind of
Patrick, you wanted that one there first?
Yeah, man. That's no problem at all. So let me tell you. Um, growing up, my father always taught and instilled certain values in me, and we can even go back and take it a step further. When you're
Oh no.
Patrick.
Hold on, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where Patrick
growing
go.
up as a child, you heard about basic
Oh,
needs. I always saw. Hello, guys, are you hearing me?
Yes,
Guys, are you hearing
yes,
me? Okay.
yes.
Right.
Now we
Sorry
are.
about that. Right. So
I'm wondering if I flow Patrick have.
yeah. So even growing up, you are different.
All right, Patrick. We're gonna have Joel just give us his response, his take on that question.
Yes, I'm having some connectivity issues.
Yeah,
That's
man,
all
that's
right.
fine. We make it work. But first of all, ladies, thank you so much for organizing this session. I think it's a critical point in discussions that's needed, and thank you so much for even extending an invite to us. As men coming to the forefront and stepping up, because I think one of the most important things that we have to do is to change the narrative that exists and understand that whatever it is that we would have learned, because we have learned some really toxic traits passed down that has become a part of our operation as men. And sometimes a lot of them are underlying that we don't even realize are actually really, really toxic traits. And as such, we have so much unlearning to do. I mean, growing up, the usual, you hear that, men are supposed to be strong and don't show emotions or anything. And that part of toxicity has taken over in terms of how we even treat our queens. And what you have is you have a confused kind of state of how men are supposed to operate, and men like myself and Patrick have to now step up to the forefront and actually speak out, try to curate some movement that's in support of what our women are doing, and to also try and see how best we can help our brothers to unlearn all of these foolishness that they've been taught, over the years. So it's very critical that we do stand up and represent. And I think, if we're supposed to get into some of the things that we learn growing up, it would take a day and a year and probably a century. But I just think it's important for us to figure out where we are and try to find really good solutions and chart a way forward so that we can, the new generation that's coming up, we can at least get some sense into them, because it really, really is a toxic setup of standards that's really out there and preached.
Right. I agree. But on that point of things that you learned, right? We're not
Yes.
gonna delve into that because we know a lot of things we just wish didn't even exist. Like we wish we didn't have to unlearn certain things or unteach. But what thing do you wish you could change about the gender dynamic that exists in Jamaica?
One of them definitely has to do with the putting careers. Okay, putting a career to a gender, growing up again because of how our things are set up. And I don't know if much progress has been made in terms of trying to change around that stigma that's attached to gender and roles. That's something that I think is really a catalyst as to why we are where we are today. So one of the things is definitely gender roles, telling girls and telling boys that, okay, this career is for you, because boys, you are tough, so you need to be a soldier, you need to be a police. And then you have so many history makers right now. Just the other day I was reading where I think she's Jamaican descent. First, must she the first black woman who must ever fly something. I don't get the full scope of it, and it's always historical news when things like that happen. And I think it's important for us to kind of segue away from that, move away from that. If somebody wants to do something, whether you're a male or a female, what's really the bottom line is really the objectives and goals that you have in place to do that. Another key thing that I wouldn't consider it key, but toxic thing that I would have learned growing up, as again, this thing about tying back religion and Christianity to men being in charge of the household and stuff. I know and a lot of men have used that to kind of beat them chest and
Right.
stamp this kind of authoritative approach. And again, that is something that has simmered into so many different small operations. It's like a ripple effect because of this one belief. And as such, you find it that being the bearer of several responsibilities, etc., you find it that in households where there's a disconnect, it's kind of like, okay, because the man is in charge, anything goes, so as so it's supposed to go. Women submitting, and those little terms, I think it
Right.
really creates such an environment that fuels so many other wrong things. And if I could change something, I definitely change something about that approach as well. I feel like, the few people like me, you, Chelsea, and we're kind of try to educate ourselves and understand and are goal oriented. We really don't look at things that way, but it's unfortunate because you have the majority that really look at things that way. You know what I mean? That is something that I definitely think a lot of unlearning needs to happen. I feel like everybody is equal, and whatever it is that you bring to the table should be of value and of substance. And as long as it's not really taking me out of a certain zone where I'm sacrificing, certain values and objectives to, because of what society has painted it's supposed to be like.
Wow, what's your take on that, Chelsea? Enough online. Like, we just have to go start from scratch.
No, really, we have to go start from scratch. But to the question that was asked about what I wish was different about the dynamic, it would definitely have to be the double standards that we have.
Yes.
And the gender roles. So to kind of echo what you're saying, Joel, yes, we have double standards. And for example, like they would say, okay, a guy isn't supposed to take up like chefing and like being a fashion designer because, say that kind of look away, that kind of look funny, right? Versus, a woman saying, okay, you want to become an engineer, you want to do construction. You're like, where you going to take up that for? Like, what are you doing? So just to echo, I think obviously it's wrong. And I wish that's something that would change, because I feel like if that would change, then people would just be freer, literally freer to do and pursue what they want to pursue. Another thing that I want to change, or I wish we are changing about the gender dynamic, is like the gender roles, as I said before. So when you're growing up, say, woman, you're supposed to wash, cook, and clean. I'm sure a lot of the women here, a lot of the girls that are listening and watching the live, from you're about 10, 11, yeah, clean, yeah, cook, yeah, wash, or one or a mixture of those three. While, a man, a boy, he takes a while, to get into that. And I feel like because we have those gender roles, women or girls, let's call them, they're girls, they're basically forced to grow up faster. So basically, force ripe. So when you see people calling people force ripe, is our culture make women force ripe? Because you're telling me from about 10, 11, 12 that, you have to know for wash, cook, and clean, because this is the type of woman your husband going to want, and all of that, while they're a bit less hard, or
Right.
less hard on men when it comes to things like that. So that's my take on it.
I know, girls who know, we're all about having autonomy over your body and your sexuality, and I totally agree with that. But whenever the message of abstinence comes into play, we are always very ready to preach that to our girls as opposed to our guys, which I find very confusing, because if you're teaching the girls to avoid guys, and just lock up your vagina and don't do anything with it and go over to the side, and you're telling the boys, hey man, you can go for that girl, like, where am I vagina from?
Yalis, the girls' mentality.
So,
Yalis mentality.
I'm happy that you mentioned that, Shanti, because is this discussion alone is showing me how much of a far way we have to go. First of all, we have a very festive comment section, so big up everybody. And something that jumped out to me from Sabrina Brown. She was saying that masculinity has to be redefined in this country. And it's going back to what Chelsea and Shanti just mentioned a while ago in terms of even preaching abstinence. You know what happens when a young man tries to abstain? He's called gay. That's what happens. You're not a girl. Yeah, we know the words, we know the terms.
Right.
And as such, you find it that younger men, because even for me, if I had a very high self-esteem. Growing up and knowing myself, I always knew what I wanted. And in a first form, I became a Christian very young. Something else now, but I became a Christian very, very young, and the guiding principles and stuff like that. You're abstaining throughout high school and etc. And I was always bold and vocal, but I was one in 1,000 who was vocal about something like that, because other boys would have felt uncomfortable talking about abstinence and stuff because of what you would have been told. Growing up here, say you need to have enough girl, you need to have this, you need to have that, you need to have sex because you know money if you do X and Y. And as such, you find it that a lot of younger men are pressured into that, and as much as though they probably want to abstain, and then because they don't really have a proper dialogue as it relates to sexuality in terms of having even a discussion along that line. Whenever I mention sexuality, it is so delicate, and not even don't even let us not even get into the degree at which you even need to bring across a message to a younger man about sexuality because of how complicated we painted the picture. And if you can't even have a discussion like that, it goes back to what Sabrina mentioned in the chat just now. We have to redefine masculinity in this place. Just the other day when I did the project Black Kings Rising, and I invited Paul March, a top makeup artist in Jamaica, to come and do the man them makeup. And some of the guys at first, they were so uncomfortable because first of all, they've never seen a male makeup artist before. And secondly, they're like, me not normally wear makeup, and we're like, guys, you need to look good for the picture because you're gonna look greasy like jerk pan if put on the makeup. And that is when they started understanding, but is my masculinity this fragile where I can't put on makeup or have a male makeup artist put on? I was talking to Paul, and Paul is like, yo, Joel, trust me. Years being in the industry, people are gonna have them things that say about you. But him love him makeup, and the man just love him artistry. And it's going to take a lot more, because I'm sure if you do something like that with even from a national standpoint or whatever, but probably we need more of that kind of dialogue and that kind of representation so people can actually get it, because I think probably 99% of the time it's ignorance.
It's definitely ignorance.
I agree with that as well. But go ahead, no problem.
With the whole gender roles and like abstinence, first of all, let me say this: it might be controversial, but sex make for have, and is not only for men and boys to enjoy. Women, girls, once you reach the right age, you are supposed to have a lovely and a pleasurable sex life. And I feel like there's a double standard when it comes to just sex in general, because look at dancehall. We just preach, say, sex supposed to rough, and it's supposed to act, and it's supposed to down, cause it's under fire, and I'm like, that's not how it's supposed to be. So when we
and then everybody will watch porn. Everybody will watch porn and I try to recreate what them seeing on porn.
Exactly.
I'm like,
exactly. That's not it. So we need comprehensive sexuality education, and I'm not sure, Shanti, if this is the question you're going to ask next, but when we're going into comprehensive sexuality education, these are the things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about things like this, and we need to disrupt and tear down the image of the Madonna and the whore and the Delilah, as Carla said. That if you love sex as a woman, and if you love sex and you want to, if you want to have sex, you have autonomy over your own body. If you want to have sex, then you're not worthy of respect. Like, we need for dash with that. We need for dash with that. And like, no,
you need for know. You need for know. When I don't see up Jamaica Sexual Harassment Edition, break down gender inequality.
Those are here.
That's a really good point there, Chelsea, because again, it comes back down from the notion that's been traditionally passed down. You know what I mean? And it is so critical for us as young people to be having these dialogues, because that's the only way we will be able to educate our peers. Because I'm telling you, some people, some something out there, some traditional ways and some traditional knowledge of how things are done are out there that where we would imagine actually existing. And it's so important for us to educate others and have forums like these that can actually discuss very uncomfortable topics, because other people yearn for this kind of knowledge. And it's very important for us to not beat around the bush and create a space where people can be comfortable to share whatever it is. And I just feel like too many things are heavily reliant on the gender restrictions and the gender expectations. And I think that is why we can't progress in so many ways. Just the other day, I was even, I saw Chelsea tweeting and sharing information around the whole minister's statement that was done. And I'm saying, if we had robust men in parliament and in power who understood the importance of what a woman has to experience when it comes down to sexual harassment, we would be, we would be a better nation. We will be a better nation. And because that is not in place, you find it that you have to have advocacy groups bearing the blunt of what decision makers should be doing, because the men are not educated. They don't really care. They don't really see it as that. It is a man's world, when really and truly it's a man's world of some toxic traits. And until that is cleansed and some improvements are made, that's the only way you'll be able to see some progress.
That is very true. And with that, I'm going to go to the comment section because it's spicy over here. So right now we have chit chat with Shan saying, talk through Joel. Selena saying, ignorant. And Kimberly, girls are taught to be gatekeepers and boys are taught to be score seekers. My goodness, that was a good one. Very, very, very accurate. A strong dose of the truth right there. And we have even so at Chelsea, the fact that a woman is fully aware of her sexual self and may be flirtatious, it is misconstrued as an invitation to pounce upon her inappropriately.
Wait, let me add to that too. You see, when we were just starting to have the conversation about, women should have autonomy over their bodies, when we just started Girls Who Know. And I was really vocal about it. And I cannot tell you the amount of DMs and messages that I got from men, big, tough, grey tone man. I said, oh, okay, so I see that you are, you're liberal. And I'd like to, be liberal too, basically. And I'm like, this is not an invitation for you to pounce. Like, it isn't. And I think when we're talking about, having a conversation about sex and just things like these in general, it has to be a safe space, because they're predators and people are going to want to take advantage of it. But yeah, continue reading the comments, Shante.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
I also want to make you guys aware that we are having a t-shirt giveaway again. So please follow us at Girls Who Know JA. This is the post that you have to comment under to win a free t-shirt. And I'm going to go back to the comments right now. I just had to let you guys know that you could win something at the end of this. Esther says, while it is easy for us to have these conversations, the challenge will be to separate religion from gender and sex education.
Wow. Spot on on that one, Esther.
Esther Gale.
It is a mix-up. It is so mixed up. It is so I don't know.
It's fine. It's like it join up. It's like it's a conjoint twin we're born, and we need Dr. Ben Carson to separate them.
Because my thing is, while the church and while Christianity preaches, no sex before marriage, that's not that another tagwan. So how can you, and it's because of the whole natural aspect of it. If we get scientific, humans being sexual beings, etc., how can you then, as a model institution, and I know that we have Christians here that really believe in that, and we can have differences of opinion, but how can you, as a model institution, look at the quote-unquote crisis as to what's happening and figure out a way, probably a messaging now need to change to more abstinence instead of this restrictive view, no sex before marriage, because that's not what the reality is. You know what I mean? So even where that is counter, I'm happy that Esther raised that, because that is going to require a really drastic degree of maturity to have a conversation along that line. Because if we go back into and the people in the church, and if we start talking against certain things, because the preacher them and the pastor them and them same one are a part of this whole issue as to why we have sexual harassment happening right now.
Yeah.
And it can't be twofold. You have to come together with the thing and understand that humans being sexual beings want to have sex. How can you then come and figure out a way to change your messaging and narrative so that it is not this restrictive approach, because it's frightening and it's scaring young
effective.
Christians to have conversation with their parents.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, another riveting session. Thank you so very, very much, Joel. Losa, this little session, it needs to go beyond this. And I'm pretty sure Girls Uno is going to take up the mantle and ensure that more conversations such as this one takes place. Thank you so very
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you guys so much. This was good.
It was so good. Have a good day, Joel.
All right, Chelsea, Shanti, take care.
Yeah, man. Okay, Chelsea. Wow.
Wow.
My soul is being fed right now. Okay. So right now we're going to be joined by Youth Parliamentarian Tamoy Campbell and Youth Advisory Council Shakira Douglas. All right, let's get them up on here. Shakira, hello. Where is Tamoy? Oh, I can't hear you, Shakira.
Yeah, I just realized my mic was muted.
Okay, good. I'm gonna give Tamoy a quick minute to join us. Well, you could start with the questions and I'll just fill him in once he's on here. So, could you describe your role as representatives in Youth Parliament and, as for you, Youth Advisory Council?
First of all, let me say thank you for the invitation. I've been tuning in from the start of today's session and it has been so riveting. I've been learning a lot. Girls Who Know JA, you guys are really representing, and I'm happy that a space like this exists. Now, as you said, I'm Shakira Douglas and I serve as a youth advisor on the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica. And essentially our role is to advise the government on policy and to ensure specifically that youth issues, whatever they may be, are mainstreamed into policy documents.
Gotcha. Okay, so with that being your role, what do you take into consideration as a woman going into politics?
If you had asked me this question a year or so ago, I would have told you that no interest in politics. I ain't going in. I'm not going in. Like that's not for me. But the reason why that was my perception is because I always viewed the space as barbaric and, full of corruption, the usual narrative that's
right.
But now, growing up, maturing and realizing that in Jamaica, our context is that you have more women in this country. Blanket. You have more women in this country. But in the highest form of representation, in our political system, you don't have enough women being represented. And when you don't have enough women in political representation, that means that there's a limited amount of persons who can bring sensitive issues relating to the well-being of women in this country.
Right.
That voice is limited. So me, being a young woman, considering entering into politics specifically to serve in our Senate, I'm considering that it's a male-dominated field. It's male-dominated. I'm considering that how they portray women in politics right now is not good. I'm considering that at the end of the day, you have this sort of romance thing going on from society that reaches up into our political system. There's so many things to consider. But what I also have as hope is that you also have a rich culture of women who have represented, who have been bringing issues such as abortion, maternity leave, or mortality rates, things that really affect us, which are not necessarily our routine issues, but these are really the pulse of our country. So I'm considering all these things, and this brings me hope, and this is my motivation towards wanting to join this space.
Wow, wonderfully said. Yeah, you brought up a lot of hard-hitting points just now. the fact that we have more women in Jamaica, but when it comes on to politics, that statistic doesn't hold true anymore. It doesn't translate, rather, and like it's not reflected. When we look at the numbers, when we look at, you go Garden House, and it's like you probably go to like JC, or K, all boys school all over again, and it's like you have the 1 and 2 female teachers, but really and truly it's like an all boys school. And I understand that.
It's disheartening, right? It's kind of disheartening because
It
there's
is.
so many things that represent us, and a great example of it happened the other day. I mean, you can't necessarily tell a man about a female's issue. These are things that you can only experience if you're a female. And
Right.
this came recently with the whole comment made by our Minister Chuck. That just goes to show that this is the kind of distastefulness that our issues are met with when we bring them up in policy, when we bring them up for bills to be considered. This is it. So these are the things that I consider wanting to drive me crazy.
Wow. And what is the role of young people in politics and influencing legislation? What is our role and what is your role?
To sum this up in a lot of words, Tamoy is here. Hi, Tamoy.
Hello, Tamoy.
To sum this up in words, I always view it as this kind of flow chart. So legislation is influenced by policy, and policy is influenced by our culture. So in summing up what the role that young people have as it relates to our legislation, we first have to look at what is culturally accepted in our country among young people. And if the narrative is that I heard somebody say it earlier, that the culture has become harassment in blanket words. That has become our culture. So the role of young people now is really and truly to learn how to advocate. And I think that's something that we have been missing. I mean, I'm thankful for a space like Girls Who Know JA. That's something that we have been missing, that era of advocacy. I mean, a lot of the things in this country are like 9-day wonders. They happen and we're excited about it for the minute, and then a couple days it's gone again. Because we haven't learned the art of advocating, and we haven't learned the art of rallying around an issue and really putting it before our stakeholders. Because the truth of the matter is, decisions are being made all around us about us. And if we don't start to hold our officials accountable, then we're going to always get the nasty end of the deal. So yes, I think the role of young people as it relates to legislation is that, yes, we can influence it, but currently because we're not united, I mean, we're so... I don't want to... We're kind of self-serving in this generation. We're kind of self-serving, and it's just the truth. I mean, we're all looking out for our interests first, and not a lot of people decide that, okay, this is an issue that affects, probably not affecting me, but it affects my brother, it affects my sister. Let us see what we can do to ensure that we get something.
It's getting out of that all for myself. If it has nothing to do with me, it's like monkey see. Somebody said to me recently that, if it's not affecting you, then why do you have to speak up? And it's that kind of selfish behavior and mentality that kind of just hinders progress. Hello, Tamoy. Thank you so much for joining us. With that, I'm going to ask you just a few questions because we're almost at the end of this segment and I want to get to the comments. But what is your role as a youth representative in youth parliament? Oh, your mic. Oh no, we can't hear you, Tamoy. See if you could unclick mute.
There we go.
No. Let me hear you? Oh, can you hear me? Oh, let me see. Oh my goodness, that's not good. Chelsea, could you check out her mic real quick? If not, I'm gonna move on to Shakira, and then while Chelsea checks your thing, I'm gonna get back to you, and that will be the last question. Why do you think this is kind of a spicy question? Why do you think some lawmakers right now in Jamaica are so anti-Me Too, if you do think they are?
To be honest, as a student studying law, I realized that one of the first objectives of persons who are legislators is to create laws that, as best as possible, balance the interests of all people of every group as best as possible. So that's a blanket statement. No, I think when it comes down to a Me Too movement in Jamaica, what we would have realized is that Me Too came out of women who have had inappropriate sexual advances made to them, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, sexual violence, the range of inappropriateness that has been dealt out to them. And then after a period of years now, these women, these survivors, have now found confidence to come out and speak about these issues. I think though when it comes to legislators, they forget that there are people who these laws will affect, and we forget the people in the making of these laws. So what they may be looking at now is the fact that you kind of have to balance it, because the truth is malicious people exist on both sides of the gender divide. And we would have seen it recently too, with a lot of women who got the strength to come out on social media and say, this happened to me when I was this age by this person. In the midst of that strength, you had also malicious females who took it as an opportunity to defame men who didn't really do anything to them. Right. So I think that's the consideration that lawmakers have been taking when it comes down to making laws. And so that is why, they have opted that, we don't necessarily want that here. But the reality is we do need that here. There are too many things going on in the corporate world, under the homes that are swept under the rug, that are not spoken about because our women are just fearful, and our men. So I think it's something that we need, and as best as possible, we need to kind of frame what that would look like from a legislative standpoint.
Wow, thank you, Shakira. Hello, Tamoy. Oh, we can't hear you still. Wait, I think did you hear it? Did you hear it just now?
Oh no.
We can't hear you. Wow. I'm so sorry. With that, I'm gonna take the comments right now. While you could somebody says check your device settings. Probably check this out for a little bit. We have a few minutes and we really want to hear you speak. So just sort that out and come back to us, Natamoy. PMs. All right, so we have some comments here. Califia says, the truth is that we don't feel heard. We don't think anyone is listening. I agree with that. And Kimberly saying, church is perpetuating the wrong interpretations of the Bible, and so expected Christian behavior. Yeah, I get that. Well, do you have something to say to that?
If I can add to that a little bit, I think Joel would have mentioned it earlier when he was saying that the narrative that comes out of the church is no sex before marriage. No, I'm a Christian, but at the end of the day, you also have to have wholesome discussions about sex in all spaces. I think what is missing is have a conversation. I think the church is so afraid of talking about sex, and they don't realize that if they don't talk about it, other people are going to teach their children, their congregation, society is going to tell them. So I think that we need to have wholesome conversations about sex. We need to get to that place of maturity as a nation, really.
Wow, I 100% agree. I'm a Christian as well, right? But I see the need. It is imperative that we talk about these things. If you don't sit down and talk to these children, who is? And the persons that are going to do that are persons you don't want to hear any piece of advice from. So you have to take the onus is on you. You have to take it up on yourself to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about sex. Like, why is sex such a bad word? Why is penis? Why is masturbation? Those things exist. We have to talk about it. Like, let's be real.
From school. I didn't learn about sex from my parents. I didn't learn about it from church,
and that needs to change
at school. So we have to start having wholesome conversations. And then to comment also to your other, I don't remember her name. She was saying that sometimes you don't feel heard as young people.
Yeah, Califia.
The truth is that there are a lot of spaces in this country where young people have now been brought to the table. I mean, Youth Advisory Council is an example of that, where young people are now being allowed to sit on boards and to make their voice heard in policy. I mean, some things that wouldn't have happened years ago. I mean, I consider I'm very young, and right now I serve on the board for the Maxfield Park Children's Home, and that would have never happened previously. So I think the spaces are there. It's getting better. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, but I think it is getting better. And as young people, we're very resilient. Use up the spaces, social, go out, vote. Hold your officials accountable, because when we all rally, we can get the
Don't it? Wow, thank you so much for that, Shakira. That was a lovely session. I'm so sad we didn't get to hear from Tamoy. I know, but guys, we are not done quite yet. Next up, we have the economic side of things and how gender inequality kind of just goes around into those spaces, in the workplace, in corporate worlds. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Right now, I'm no longer going to be your host for the proceedings. Ali Matalon is actually going to take over, and I'm going to introduce her right now. So Ali holds a master's in public administration from Columbia University with expertise in urban and social policy. Her passion for human-centered design and policy was nurtured during her time at Northeastern University's Social Enterprise Institute, and later as an advocacy support specialist with the United Nations High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment. Ali manages several large-scale projects inclusive of the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers Kingston Hub Youth Mentorship Program, Project MEND. She is CSR certified and was recently named an Eisenhower Youth Leader for her work developing corp care, and goals to use that work to sensitize the corporate world in Jamaica. Ali believes that if the private sector resources are allocated more effectively to social causes, then that will better all of Jamaica. So without further ado, let us have Ali Matalon on the virtual stage. Hello, Ali.
Hi, Shante. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay, wow, thank you so much for coming on here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. I'm just gonna say my bye-byes right now. Thank you guys so much. It was lovely being here, and take it away, Ali. Have a good one.
Thank you, Shante. Can you let in my guest for me?
Okay, Chelsea will do that for you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Dr. Thomas. How are you?
How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Shante, for that awesome introduction. Welcome, everyone who is still taking part in this session. I'm so delighted to be here and also to be joined by Dr. Margot Thomas, who is also in the live now. So I'll go ahead by introducing her, or I'll begin by introducing her, since Shante did such a good job of introducing me. And as Shante mentioned, I spent a year working with the UN Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment, where I met Dr. Margot Thomas. She's the chief of the secretariat for that panel. It's why I call her chief to this day. And so that's how we are connected. But so I started my working relationship with Dr. Thomas through the UN, and after 2 robust reports on women's economic empowerment were released by the panel, Dr. Thomas went on to form a board to continue the important conversation. Dr. Thomas is the founder and CEO of WAY, Women's Economic Empowerment. You can find them at #WayForward. She has served for 2 decades as a senior official at the World Bank Group, provided policy advice to over 50 national and subnational governments. She was the co-chair of the 2018 Think 20 Task Force on Gender Economic Equity and the 2019 Think 20 Task Force on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In September 2019, Dr. Thomas was appointed as a member of the first cohort of Global Solutions Institute Fellows to conduct research and provide thought leadership on critical issues underpinning the work of the G20.
In 2017, Dr. Thomas was appointed as an associate fellow at Chatham House, the UK Royal Institute of International Affairs. And above all of this, she's one of the kindest people I've ever met, an inspirational leader, a teacher to all of the young people like myself in her life, and an example for all of us in championing the causes that we believe in. So please help me in the comment section in welcoming Dr. Thomas to this conversation with Girls Who Know JA. So we can't hear them, Dr. Thomas, so we'll read them. But Girls Who Know JA says welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So Dr. Thomas, let me start by asking you, why is women's economic empowerment so important, and is it just a women's issue?
I think that's a wonderful way to start this conversation. So before I start, I do want to say that it's a pleasure to be able to engage on this platform. I want to thank you, Ali, for inviting me to speak and return some of the compliments, because you, I think, embody the spirit of the youth of the Caribbean and globally. And I always say that this is the next generation. You're the next generation of leaders. So I want to say the same to all of the particularly young women, but also young men who may be listening in today. And I hope that through these conversations, each and every one of them will step up, because the reality is you can lead from wherever you sit or where you stand. What's important is that each of us understand who we are, who we want to be, and are willing to do something about it in the interest of everyone around us. That's the essence of human value, in my view. And it brings out the best in all of us, hopefully. To answer your question about women's economic empowerment, I think it's important to understand what it really means and why is it an issue. And the reality is that, particularly in the economic space, that is in terms of in the labor market, in terms of entrepreneurialism, in terms of being an economic actor, for a whole host of cultural, legal, social, political, and power dynamic reasons that precede all of us, women have had limited roles in the economic space. In modern times, there has been a sea change, particularly following the Second World War, when women entered the labor force globally out of necessity. And women have continued to have that presence. But again, because of these norms and policies and behaviors that reinforce a lot of cultural dynamics that specify roles, it's not about biology, because women have proven that they can be equally active. There may not be equity, or there may not be replacements, and I don't think nature intended us to replace the other. We each bring unique value into the world, but there have been a lot of limitations on women's ability to work and to be entrepreneurs in the economic space. We see it manifested today. A very good place to look would be relating to the differentials in compensation for work. We know that this is a global phenomenon. On average, and this is the reason why we acknowledge on International Pay Day, right? These differences. So if you were to take, for example, in the United States in 2020, I believe on average, women earned 70 cents on the dollar compared to a man. Now, it's different depending on where you are. In the UK, the differentials are the same, but by and large, women earn somewhere between 50% and 75% on average what a man would earn for doing the same kind of work. And the reasons for this, like I said, many of them are cultural, many are legal. In some countries, the women's right to work is prescribed in the law. It dictates what kinds of occupations women can hold. And it's easy to take these things for granted. There are laws that and practices, for example, that make it easier or more difficult for a woman to get a loan under certain circumstances. Um, and these things together, taken together, whether it be to own land, to inherit property, to work, as I said, or to access credit, taken together, limit women's ability to engage on an equal basis in the economic space. When you add to that care responsibilities and unpaid work, again, the ILO has done a lot of work around this, and we know that today this is a big issue. Then the problems are even greater for women, and the disadvantages are greater. Another example would be we've seen the data that in professions where women predominate, the average compensation and the conditions of work are different. So, take, for example, a profession like nursing. In the earlier times, nursing was predominantly a male engagement, or there were more men who started out as nurses. As women entered the labor force in greater numbers and were able to work longer, because in the Caribbean, for example, I know this because I've heard from my parents. If a woman became a nurse, the moment she got married and she had her first child, she was out of the profession, even though a lot of investment would have gone into her training, for example. Right. And we have different manifestations of that. But the point I want to make is wherever women have taken over from men as the predominant actors in a profession, the average salary has decreased. So, what does it cost us as a result? The World Bank has estimated that just working on the basis of remuneration, right, in terms of human capital and the value generated globally, the world loses roughly $160 trillion of economic value. Mm-hmm. What I like to say to particularly politicians and policymakers is when we inhibit women's ability to contribute in the economic space, and when we do not even count in our GDP the unpaid work and the economic contribution of women, we're actually reducing the economic pie. It means that there's less available for everyone, and so people are less well off as a result.
Hi, Chelsea.
And it means that the intergenerational effects of deprivation and poverty continue on. So, in a way, they're actually imposing a tax on economic growth in the current generation, and then imposing the same for subsequent generations. Right. So, when you look at economic empowerment, when you step back from it, regarding women, it's not a woman's issue. This is a societal issue. It affects every one of us. And the evidence really supports the conclusion that when women are better off, families are better off, communities are better off, societies are better off, because women then are allowed not only to engage in the economic space, but they have voice and agency, and they're represented, and they're valued equally as human beings. And that's the goal, I think, for this discussion, particularly for the young women who are listening here. I want to say to them, you need to understand your value. You need to understand who you are and what you're entitled to, and do not be afraid to demand it.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you underscored not just the importance of women's economic empowerment, but how it's so critical to the development of society overall, and how our global economy loses from women's disempowerment. So I want to bring women's economic empowerment into the context of both a global pandemic, as well as it relates to sexual violence, sexual harassment, as a primary theme of this conference hosted by Girls Who Know JA. So just to start off that conversation, I wanted to make reference to, as you mentioned, the International Labour Organization is studying a lot around informal work as well as unpaid care work for women. In a study that they recently did about the pandemic, they estimated that approximately 1.6 billion informal workers, or about half of the global workforce, stand in immediate danger of having their livelihood destroyed due to the pandemic. And in the Americas, where we are in the Caribbean specifically, that there would be a 12.4% loss in working hours. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Thomas, with this in mind, how are women further disadvantaged in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic? And how are women in the developing world, or what is commonly referred to as the global south, more adversely affected, given the even wider gaps between equity that women are able to achieve in our region?
Yes. Well, you know, the pandemic has, in terms of the social and economic impacts, it has amplified the structural inequities that exist. And of course, women and girls are disproportionately impacted, and they carry a bigger share of the costs and the risks associated with the pandemic.
Right.
If only because they're the caregivers, but also because the sectors of the economy that are critical for the response to the pandemic are heavily dependent on women's labor. So one of the facts that have come to bear is that globally, 70% of the caregivers in the health space are women. And that means that they're even more exposed because they're on the front lines. And similar proportions exist for services and work that is considered essential as part of the response to the pandemic. So women have a double jeopardy. They have a double jeopardy because they're the ones doing the work, invariably, but they're the ones who face greater risk, and they're the ones who are on average paid less for their services, therefore are more likely to fall victim to the effects, the economic effects, when they lose their jobs. They work in professions where they have less protection. So we've all seen the stories of healthcare workers who don't have access to PPEs, and the impact on their families. But also, women and girls are invariably the ones that are most vulnerable economically. And therefore, for families living below the poverty line, they're the ones, again, who bear that cost and risk.
Absolutely.
You mentioned about sexual violence, but that's just one of the factors that are even further exacerbated because of the pandemic.
Right.
And your question about North and South.
Yes.
You know, the reality is, and again, we can thank the pandemic for this. The issues in the North and the issues in the South are inherently the same. They may be manifested in different ways, or the impacts may be deeper and more urgent and more detrimental. So it's an issue of the extent,
right?
But the fundamental issues are the same whether we're in the north or in the south.
Absolutely. And Steve, I'm really glad that you underscored how significant it is when there is a crisis, for example, a global pandemic, that all underlying inequities are further exacerbated. And you mentioned that that would be the case as well with physical or sexual violence against women, particularly with a backdrop of 1 in 3 women worldwide already being affected by physical or sexual violence. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we can ensure that women have the resources to support their transition out of an abusive relationship, for example, or avoid circumstances in which they're financially dependent on an abusive partner, and a plethora of other issues in the context of this pandemic. And as you said, I think that that's applicable to the global north and south, especially at this time. And then I want, after we discuss that, for us to transition into maybe some key ways of intervention or resources that we can provide women with at this time, and provide leaders with.
Mm-hmm. I think, when we talk about abuse, it in some respects, it means different things to different people. And it's really important. I think one of the things that a forum like this could do is help to establish a broader understanding of what abuse is. Mm-hmm. I don't claim to be an expert, because you really need to have psychologists and sociologists, and there are people who specialize in this and really have a very good understanding of the spectrum of issues that are covered when we talk about abuse. Of course, there's a sexual abuse, but there's psychological abuse, there's physical abuse, there's financial abuse, right? And we live in cultural situations where quite often all of these things are intermingled. So for a person confronted with that abuse, or when we observe a situation where there is abuse, there are a whole host of cultural reasons that condition our response. We may look at it from a social perspective, and we say, well, there are people beneath our social status, and that's how they live. And that influences our response, particularly in the Caribbean. I think we've seen that quite often. Or the psychological abuse is not recognized. And this happens a lot in the case where there are young women or girls who are being abused, where they're groomed, they're raised to think that this is the way they are to be treated, or their situation or their abusers convince them, or society convinces them, that they deserve to be treated this way, and it's their fault. So I think we need to do some work in order to get to solutions. We need to, first of all, have better understanding. Many of our social, economic, and political institutions reinforce a lot of these behaviors. We need to step back, look at laws, and see where is it that laws offer protections to abusers, or where is it that laws are manipulated, and therefore the abused are disempowered and not offered protection under the law. We need to look at our police officers and the kinds of training they get in terms of how they handle complaints from abusers. The courts as well. And the same with our financial institutions. So if you have a wife who's not permitted access to a bank account or to financial resources, are those people within the banks trained to recognize situations like that?
Right.
So I really think that as a community and as a society, we need to talk about these things and explain them, and we need to bring them into the open. What's the role that a church plays in this? Where you have a pastor who may well say to a wife who's being beaten, well, maybe you did something, or maybe this is what God is asking you to accept.
Right.
How many women have been killed for that reason?
Absolutely.
The other aspect of abuse that I think we need to be sensitive to is that we often see this abuse on the abused as men or the abusers as men, and they are predominantly men. But we need to recognize that sometimes the abusers can be women.
Absolutely.
And we need to see the same thing in the relationship between parents and children, or children and elderly. Elder abuse is
they may live with. Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought up how cultural contexts affect the perception of victimhood, or for a better terms, how survivors should view themselves, right? What is wrong and what is not wrong varies dependent upon the education that you experience as a child. And I wanted to note here, and I know that a lot of people in the comments are asking for the studies that support a lot of the things that we're talking about, which I will absolutely share with everyone after. But in a study done by CARICOM a few years ago, it was suggested that 48.8% of Jamaican women between the ages of 15 and 25 report that their first sexual experience was forced. So 48.8%. Almost a majority of young women, and many of these forced sexual initiation cases are considered to be done by members of the household, as well as, even more frighteningly than that, if possible, Jamaica has the highest murder rate of women in the world. So it's really important for us, as you mentioned, to have these conversations and sensitize our population that forced sexual initiation is the same thing as rape. And that we need to be dealing with it in a similar fashion and having conversations around it in a similar fashion. So with that in mind, Dr. Thomas, and I know you mentioned it in terms of having laws that protect women and protect children, and allows children to have access to the type of education that they need in order to differentiate between what is abusive and what is not. I wanted to ask you what you believe to be the top 3 normative beliefs that hinder our collective ability to deliver women with justice, as well as maybe the top 3 ways of undermining those normative beliefs or behaviors, whether that be a policy intervention or be interventions like the one that we're all a part of right now through this summit.
That's a tough one to answer for me, because I think you see an interplay here. A lot of, and people may not agree with me, but when we talk about culture, what reinforces culture? It's a power dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the powerful versus the powerless. But a lot, in many of those cases, the law, religion, and cultural practices are utilized to give power to the powerful over the powerless. And it happens on every level of society. And it's the same thing within families, to be honest, right? And then there is the issue of complicity, where you have a family with a child that's being abused, without judging the reason. Often the issue is dealt with by the complicity of the adults or people within that household to accept that behavior, maybe because of economic dependency, maybe because there's a lack of voice, the feeling that nobody would believe them if they were to explain, or fear of prosecution, right? So again, I think as communities and as people, we need to understand, and again, this is where many of us get our religious bearing, right? Or a religious footprint. But it's how it's interpreted and how the practices allow this to veer off course. I think we need to come together and recognize it's not just a declaration. This is not a checkbox. At the very essence of our policy and our politics and our social interactions, there needs to be a renewal of the recognition that every human being has value and dignity and has basic expectations of human rights. And therefore, anything that violates that, we need to be able to bring it into the open and to take action as necessary. And that action doesn't always have to be punitive. Our aim should be to correct or to reject and therefore ensure that we protect those who need to be protected. I think if we use that as a starting point, then we can start to talk about solutions, right? And it means that when we talk about within our faith, the reality is, let me give you an example. In many societies, even though the law may prescribe, may or may not prescribe a minimum age for marriage, right? And certainly young people cannot demand to be married until they're a certain age. But we've seen situations where in religious communities where young people have been, and particularly girls, have been sexually abused. In order to protect the abuser from prosecution for statutory rape, within that community, they get together and they decide that there will be a marriage. Those kinds of behavior patterns, because then there's complicity within that community. There's complicity in the abuse. Then it becomes a norm. It becomes a standard. It becomes a practice. We talk about child marriage, and we tend to think that it happens only in certain cultures. But if we look deeply enough, it's happening right before our eyes. It's the same thing when you see in families, girls are trafficked or girls are sold for sex. It's as old as the hills. But the question is, are we willing to recognize the detrimental impacts, the psychological and the human toll of those practices, and do something about it? And are we willing to understand that when we devalue girls and treat them as less than, particularly girls, right? The intergenerational effects are horrendous, and the victims are damaged. That in itself is psychological abuse. So if we want to talk about corrections now, we need to really look at the laws. And we need to see where it is laws are being either manipulated or they're defective, deficient, or where there is complicit action in the interpretation of laws that allow these behaviors to continue. We need to look within our religious communities and ask, are these the things we've signed on for? And where is it that we can give voice to those who are affected, that they can be confident that if they appeal for help, they can receive help, or that they can speak up? You've seen instances where abusers would say to children, if you tell anyone, I'm going to kill your family. You say that to a 5-year-old, and you understand what you're doing to that child, right? So it's that manipulation that we have to resist. Mental health services. Many people who were subjected to this abuse, as they grow into adulthood, we see all sorts of mental and other manifestations of that abuse, but there's no support system or network to help them to address it. So your question, I believe, was about what kind of things need to be done. I think we need to start by looking at this very honestly and openly. There's a lot of work that's being done, and we need to really open the discussion. Providing resources in the case of emergencies. You talk about the fact that women are being murdered, but many of those women do not have recourse if they went to the police. We know how difficult that is. I remember as a child in Georgetown, Guyana, reading in the newspaper, and I heard my parents talking about it, of a woman who was being chased by her, I don't know if it was her husband or her lover or whatever, literally chased down the street. He had a cutlass in his hand, and her son was saying to her, "Run, mommy, run." That child witnessed that man cut and kill his mother on the street in Georgetown, Guyana. That image has stayed with me. And I often wonder what became of the child. But in a system, I don't claim to know what happened legally, but in a cultural context where a person is allowed to believe that they have a right to behave like that, we have to ask, where was the failure? Right? So we have to have systems in place that when there's a cause for alarm or when there's a report, what kind of action is taken?
Absolutely.
And how do you deal with the intimidation? Many women report these things and they go back and they say in the courts, no, it didn't happen. Why? And why is that allowed? And I really want to make a big push for the mental health care and the resources there as well.
Absolutely. I think it's so important for us to talk about our collective responsibility in creating systems as well. So often we blame systems for not serving us. But the truth is that we all exist in societies where, particularly when we exist in democracies, we are not being asked to, as Obama says, democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to engage in the system making process. And a big way of doing that, I think what this conversation has underscored is the importance of approaching system development from an intersectional perspective. So where can we give voice? If we're sitting at a table, who is missing from that table? How are we all taking a personal responsibility for what happens in our communities? And how can we make that habitual? How can we continue doing that through whatever type of work it is, whether we're in the private sector, civil society, nonprofit space, or the government? How can we lobby for and advocate for the types of systems that serve not just us individually, but our societies and our communities best? And so I know we are almost out of time. I think we probably have about 2 minutes left. I just wanted to ask Dr. Thomas to wrap this conversation up. Is just, how do you normally leverage platforms like Way, or how can we at Girls Who Know Jamaica leverage our platform to develop necessary resources and really underscore the importance of so many things that we have discussed in this conversation, and the human rights of women, and how they should be guaranteed, and how to dismantle systems of oppression?
Of course, there's not a simple answer to that, and I know you know that.
Yes.
But there are two things that I would say. And again, kudos to the organizers, and kudos to those who are mobilizing to do this in a way that's meaningful. When you look at this civil and social disturbance that's roiling around the world, I see two things, and I attribute it to two reasons. The inequities, the structural and systemic inequities that have become so out of whack that as individuals, we recognize that each one of us is vulnerable. We need to use that energy, and especially among the young people, because they're the next generation, right? Towards taking action. And we also need to make it clear that taking action doesn't mean turning the world on its head. We can't do that as an individual, but each one of us could take action in our particular context, in our community, and be willing to stand up for certain basic principles. And it brings that back to what I said at the beginning about recognizing that each human being has value and dignity and has basic rights.
Absolutely.
And if we can get every one of us to wake up every morning committed to acting in our right, then we can begin to see the change that we need to see.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Thomas, I just want to thank you so much, not just for being here, but for your mentorship of me, for your mentorship of all of the audience members today, for the work that you do for all of us. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. For survivors who have been listening to this conversation, we believe you. We stand in solidarity with you. And finally, I want to say thank you so much to Girls Who Know Jamaica for organizing this Unfiltered 2020 Summit for us to discuss really complex and challenging issues, both from an intersectional lens as well as looking specifically at different issues. So thank you so much. And I'm so grateful to have been able to have this conversation with you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to offer any way in which I can help or support this. I think it's worthwhile. Kudos to all involved, and keep on. Let no one take your narrative from you. You have voice. Use it.
Thanks, Chief.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, guys.
Healthy.
So, wow. What oh no, Antoinette, your mic is muted. Unmute mic. Yes.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good. What
amazing.
What a lovely piece of tea.
Right? I don't
Same.
know. Wow. It was just so good, so wholesome, so enlightening. I really, wow. I don't know. And I saw lots of comments, lots of people engaging, and that really makes me so happy.
Same here. Same here.
So good.
I think we delved into what we wanted to, and we got out of it even more than we thought that we would.
More right, yes.
So spoke about gender inequality in the Jamaican context and the cultural context, and how as a culture we're using the culture to mask.
Right.
You know, what is really sexual harassment. And then we hopped into raising boys and men that respect women, talking through comprehensive sexual education, and Joel gave some really great insights. And we hopped into the youth and politics, and like women in politics.
Yes.
And Shakira really gave really good insights as to the changes that are happening. So it's like, even though there is a long way to go, we have made some advancements, because she, as a youth representative, is now able to sit on boards and make change or contribute to making changes. Give advice to making changes to policy, which is great. And then we ended up with the lovely Dr. Thomas and Ali Matalan with just how, you know, the economic, how the inequality really affects the economy, one, and you know what we can do to kind of combat that. So
definitely a lot of gems were shared, no lies were told.
None.
And we really, really hope that you guys benefited from this conversation, benefited from this discussion, and really had some good takeaways, because we don't want to leave anybody behind in the change that is here, the change that is happening now. Exactly.
Exactly. So make sure that you hop on, catch the replay in Mr. segment or section, and join us tonight as we wind down in our summary. We're gonna have two guests. We're not saying who, but you know, you might want to hop back in if you missed some of the sections, and it's going to be tonight at 6. Yes, tonight at 6 p.m.
Jamaica time.
Yeah, Jamaica time, so that's 7 p.m. Eastern. And guys, tune in and come again to share your thoughts. Also, we're going to be announcing the giveaway winner on live tonight.
On live, yes, right.
So make sure that you enter or giveaway to win a My Name Isn't Sexiness t-shirt to take your power back and combat sexual harassment in the form of catcalling. Join us tomorrow for
day 3.
And the final day. Oh my gosh, you have so many powerhouses tomorrow. We're going to be talking about digital advocacy and the power of social media. We're going to be talking about the movement and bringing on a couple of organizations and experts in the field to talk about healing, resources for healing, and where if you're a survivor or if you know of anyone who's a survivor, where they can go to seek help and redress. So you want to make sure you tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Dr. Terry Carroll Reed in the house. We're gonna have youth leaders like Chadrafri and Daniel Mullins, branding guru Domari Malcolm, and I will be talking about the Me Too movement as well as our representatives from Jamaica for Justice, and in our final panel about resources for healing, we're gonna be bringing together like a pool of different nonprofit organizations, like organizations in general, to tell you about what they do and how they can help you. So enough things planned.
Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Share the stream with a friend. Have them catch yesterday's replay and today's replay. Encourage them to join the live. That's tonight at 6 p.m. Guys, just stay in touch. Stay in tune with our social media, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. If you have, opinions or thoughts, tweet them and, hashtag Unfiltered 2020. Engage with us. If you have any DMs or just, concerns, feel free to reach out.
We answer them.
Yeah.
That's really it, guys. So we will see you at 7. No, I'm saying that wrong.
6.
We'll see you
at Jamaica time.
We will see you at 6 tonight. So that's it, guys. Peace.
Bye. Thank you everybody for joining. Catch you later and tomorrow.